Aloha, welcome to Outside the Lines Talanoa panel. Today we have Farah, Sidiana, Arizona and Ashley, and we're going to be talking about equity in sport. So Sidiana, to open the Talanoa panel, we're going to ask you to please define equity, parity and equality.
So often people use those terms interchangeably, and that's where you run into problems because we all think we're driving towards the same thing, but we're actually driving towards different things. So the way we can think about this is if we take a sport like BMX biking, right? If we're thinking about it in terms of equality, we would go, well, every child in New Zealand has the opportunity to pick up BMX biking if they would like to, and we might roll it out to every single school in New Zealand and go, tick, done, equality. When we're talking about equity, we would recognise that children come from different spaces and places. And so not everybody can afford the bike, not everybody can afford the travel. And if we really wanted equity in sport, in that particular sport, we would look at kids who come from families where a BMX bike is really expensive and buy them the BMX bike. And that makes sure that everybody has the same access and starts from the same place for that sport. Parity becomes like a tool for thinking about equity and equality. So parity often means the same. So do we have population matching? Have we got the same number of men, women, and all genders in that sport? Have we got the same number of Pacific? Are they being paid the same amount? So you often hear about it in terms of pay parity. So when you're talking about these three different things, it's really important to get that number right, because if you say, oh, I'm talking about equity, and someone else says equality, you're always going to have arguments because you want different things.
If we're going to be talking about equity in sport, it's important to have a diverse range of voices that have seen the same kind of, we're in the same house and we're looking at different windows is the way that I like to see that. When we're talking about governance, if you have 12 people around the table in sport who only look out the same window, we now are only creating outcomes for the people or the groups that we're seeing outside of that window. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about equity in sport because we can be completely honest, it has not been achieved in so many different ways, but the potential of what could happen when it is achieved and put into place is actually going to be groundbreaking. So I'm happy to have that chat. Let's unpack it.
Farah, then going off there, what does kind of equity in sport look like in your specific field for football and for OFC?
From a football perspective, it's about making the sport accessible to everybody. And I think as the organisation that's responsible for developing football and delivering it within our region, our unique region, we need to start shifting our focus, and that's what the work OFC has been doing, is to see how we service our member associations. Because all our member associations are so diverse. We can't apply the same model that we apply for Fiji, to Vanuatu, to Papua New Guinea. So that's where we need to have that conversation and that back and forth and understand where are they at, what do they need, and how do we service them? Because without our member associations, OFC doesn't exist.
Yeah.
In the governance space especially, as with other areas, those things are always interlinked. And when you're speaking with people, you're speaking from two different understandings of what that means. So I think across the Pacific and in my work in Pacific Islands rugby, there is not a grand understanding of the definitions of those two things and how that can be applied in policy, governance, and work streams where you're there to serve a community. So you're there to serve your union, you're there to serve the Cook Island people, the Pacifica people. When there's not a clear understanding of that, you can't have work streams that are productive and inclusive and achieve outcomes to the success of the governing body.
Most people have this real common understanding that, everyone has to have the same amount, otherwise you're being unfair. Mm-hmm. So how do you actually bring people on board to actually say, we need to do it needs basis, and this group of people actually have more needs for the outcomes that we want, and this is why they might seem like they're getting more as opposed to another group of people.
I think we should be honest about who's saying it's unfair, right? There's a certain group that says the equity approach is unfair, and it's people who are used to privilege, who are used to access, and they feel like we're taking something away from them when we say, let's take a needs-based approach here, because they don't see the problem because they don't live it. I like the idea of, we're all looking out the same window. They've never had to look out the window that doesn't open, so they don't understand it, right? And so I think the biggest and the most powerful thing we can do is tell the same story in different ways to different audiences. Know your audience. If your audience is not interested in that story, then give them the data that shows them it's either going to be a commercial success or maybe they're good people and they just want to know that they're doing the right thing. Give them the data that shows them that this is how they can do it. And if they like a good story, give them the story. Right? The moment that I realized there was something wrong in the sports space was my mum yelling at the TV because someone kept saying Rocococo. Right? I'm Fijian. My mum was she was on it, and she yelled at the TV. And I realized that it's in something as small as how someone pronounces your name and therefore the respect they give your genealogy, that you can see how racism and inequity operates in the sport. And so it's about shifting that message in ways that speaks to the audience who you're trying to change their mind on.
It is hard to get the majority on board because it does take a lot of people who are selfless and almost ready to give up their share so that everyone can eat. And that is a whole conversation that relies on particular types of leaders or people who can A, get into the room, B, speak the language, and C, still know who they're fighting for. Like that's a very particular type of voice that you're trying to get into spaces that traditionally don't want to hear it or think that they're doing enough because they've given 5 cents to this person and 5 cents to everyone else and understood that actually you've just nailed out your approach. So with the programs that we were running out at like AUT, we had a program called UniPrep, and that basically looked to our most highly deprived communities and said, we're going to splash everything we can into you. That's not just cash, that's belief, that is resource, that is people, to say that this is where if we can take an equity-centered approach, if we can build it equity first, we will then see everyone understand that they can enter the door in front of them. The data that came out of that meant that we were able to provide opportunities at higher education for kids who otherwise were shut out before they even got a chance to know where that door is, to open it, and to very much so walk through as themselves rather than feeling like they had to walk through like someone else. So pretty cool approach. Do we transfer that to sport? I guess the conversation opens back up. Well, ultimately, I think the opportunity to believe in our young people is really undervalued. And I would say that that's probably the single most transferable skill that I've taken into sport as a manager, as a director. And it annoys so many people. And I don't understand it because I've only been surrounded by people who live and breathe the belief in our young people, because the reality is if I want to be looked after when I'm older, I need a future generation who want and are willing to look after this world. So looking at what I would like the sporting arena to look like come 2035, let's just throw that out there. Okay, cool. If I need it to look like that, what do I need to do right now? And who do I need to push and put pressure on to be able to achieve that come 2035?
Going off what Zona's saying then, Ashley, you've had some, there have been challenges that we've all probably faced, but in your particular field and experiences that you've had, how have you pushed through them, or what have you learned to try and manage it the next time it does happen?
I think being in sport, namely rugby, being a female but also being Pacifica and Māori, consciously or subconsciously, you are involved in situations that don't feel safe, don't feel like you have a voice, and don't feel like you can advocate for yourself. I think some of that comes with experience in navigating predominantly male white space, but a lot of it comes with also with every failure understanding the teachings and the lessons in it, understanding when you need to exit a situation. It may not be straight off the bat the best career move or the career move that you wanted to make, but understanding that you can't sit in spaces where your worth is being chipped away at, where you don't have a voice, and where you don't feel like you can advocate for the people that you came into this business for in the first place. And I think understanding that, seeing kind of how that manifests in the corporate world, in organisations, and how when we put in place quotas on boards, especially around having a certain amount of females on the board or a certain amount of Māori or Pacifica on boards, what it does is it creates a great conversation piece, but the work needs to be on how to create organisations once you have those people sitting on the boards that create safe spaces and policies to enable people to be able to be heard, to be recognised, to be respected, and to feel like they're adding value.
Often we find ourselves in spaces where it doesn't feel great, or we feel like we're having to make compromises to remain at the table. And one of the things I've become obsessed with lately, which is probably not healthy, is when do Pacific people who are at the table, when do we stop forgetting how we got there, right? Because we start making little compromises to try and make it work. And then when do those compromises fundamentally topple things? And then it's just, you're just sitting at a table filling space, being a really nice brown poster child, right? So we've all been there. We've all been the one that they stick on a poster and go, ta-da, amazing, one of us did it. But how do we leverage that into actual change? And it does come down to people giving up power and resources. And this is why it's a problem, right? Because we can have the pipeline, we can have all of it dreamed up, but we're still fundamentally having to ask other people to come on that dream with us. And that's where change becomes hard. Because we could have this talanoa in front of a room of Pacific people and they'd be like, yeah, get it. Put this talanoa in front of a board for a sports group and they'd be like, oh, that sounds dangerous. Don't know if we can do that today. Put them on the name of people who are not allowed to join our board. And I think that that's part of, I don't think, sometimes we feel like we can't ask questions of Pacific leaders because we feel like we will topple the whole thing. But actually we're getting to a space where we should be able to ask questions in respectful ways. And we need to be able to do all of this in ways that don't undermine sort of Pacific advancement and prosperity. It's a delicate balance, and I don't think we're at a good space yet for it. Pacific prosperity, how do we do it? What's your role in this? Where's our 10-year plan? Where's our 15-year plan? Where's our 20-year plan? Right? We've got so many of us moving through this space now that we're all kind of building our own little pipelines. And sometimes we're building out pipelines and we're stealing other people's pipes. Right? And so we're creating a problem as we're fighting amongst each other when we need this collective moment to come together, because we need to realize that it doesn't actually matter which sport a Pacific person's in. We just need all of our Pacific peoples to thrive in whatever sport they play.
At OFC, with the 11 different members that you have under it, so this is what you're talking about, is bringing a cross-sector. It's not you're in the sports run, you're over here in your commercial area, you're in the academia. It's actually bringing an understanding that it goes across industries. So how do you do that in the OFC space, kind of getting the 11 member associations kind of on the same board, or not really? And is that the point? Do you know, like recognizing that there are differences, we're not all just one Pacific?
There's value in recognizing the differences, because I don't think it's fair to someone's identity to say, well, you're all in one geographic region, therefore this algorithm should be copy and pasted across everybody. Because I think that's not actually recognizing the needs or the actual people we're serving. But I think collectively there are definite themes, you know, in terms of the challenges that are faced by working in football, by women who want to play football, by people of color in football, right? We're talking about an organization that's governed in a completely different part of the world from us. So collectively, there are challenges that our member associations experience, and that's where OFC bands together. So yeah, I think it's important to recognize the differences, because at that community level, you've got certain islands who at some parts of the year, they can't even play football because they're dealing with flooding. There is cohesiveness and there is consensus amongst New Zealand, Fiji, Solomon Islands, regardless of what their own individual circumstances are, that we have common challenges that we want to band together and advance in our region as well.
Not only those points, but you were talking about earlier around, you know, football, women, person of colour, the intersectionality of things that we all go across, that people lose in the conversations around equity in sport. Who wants to tackle that kind of question around the considerations that actually, yes, you have equity, but then there are different levels of equity within equity?
I mean, it's the bougie and brown class, right? So this is one of the things we're struggling with in higher ed, is that when you look at who's getting those Pacific scholarships, they're the bougie and brown class majority, right? So they're the kids who are already going to these high-level high schools. It's the same when you think about sports access. Who is getting access to those sports? You are getting more Pacific coming through, but are they getting access because their family have the financial resourcing to buy the sports equipment, to pay the fees, to pay for the travel, right? And if we're just going, oh, we just need Pacific people, then we're going to run into issues, because we're just going to the sociologist in me, we're just going to reinforce those economic boundary lines, right? So what we actually need to do is have a really firm understanding of, A, where in the Pacific are they from? Not just Pacific. B, where did they grow up? What do they have access to? And then we need to start thinking about how we split those resources. And it becomes a point of tension again, because we do have brown people in points of power who don't want to give up that power and resourcing. And so it's easy for us to say, oh, it's white men. But actually, some of our wonderful white men have let brown people up through as well. And they're also hoarding resources because we all want the best for our families. And what we need to do is we need to work out how do we do an intersectional analysis of that data so we can have parity, not just of ethnicity, but also of economic, of gender, all those different things, sexualities, everything, right? And still drive that sport forward in excellence, because diversity is excellence. There's no question around that, right? Equity equals excellence, not up for debate. Right?
I feel like that's a t-shirt right there.
Yeah, I think there's a likelihood to try and create solutions that actually aren't fit for the kids that we're trying to serve. And I talk about the kids a lot because I think equity, they are the biggest beneficiaries of our equitable outcomes if we get this right. And thus, when we look at our fit for purpose solutions, like I recall just this one conversation that we'd always have at work if we were feeling like we'd lost our way. And there would be 10 real profiles of these students who were year 7 and 8 at school. And the reality that we knew at that point in time was maybe 3 of those 10 would be allowed the opportunity to go to university, would be allowed the opportunity of making it out of poverty, for example. And when we had lost our way, our manager or our big boss, they'd go, all right, sweet, pick your 3. Let the other 7 just fail, pick your 3. And that, I think, like, there's this conversation about equity, but the point of pressure that I like to put on when I've got the privilege of being in the room is, what is the humane response? It's no longer about race. It's no longer about if I've got more money than you. Like, what is the most humane response to make sure that all 10 at least understand that the door's in front of them?
If we're going to use the sport as a vehicle to try and help with these inequities, that's basically the reason why you got in and stay in the sport area, right, Ashley?
A lot of it is the ability to leverage sports and the relationships made within those sports to have access to help communities through and tick off boxes for their own CSR frameworks, for instance. But the ability to use sports as a platform for a voice to empower, build capability, understand and grow communities. Namely, my work has been around Pacifica and Māori communities. But within that, like has been said before, there isn't a one-size-fits-all to the commercial program. There's lots of work being done by charitable trusts in that space, and I think the ability for sporting organisations to work with charitable trusts, such as Rugby for Life, who work with sporting organisations to do wraparound kind of holistic solutions to problems within rugby clubs that sit outside of the rugby program itself, has seen a great increase in the number of participants and the number of communities feeling like they have a voice, that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to how we should run our rugby club, how we should govern our rugby club, the kind of outline with which you can grow under a governing body. There isn't that, because they have the access and the resources and the tools through that charitable trust to be able to create outcomes that best serve their communities. And I think that's what's really special about sports, is that it has that ability to infiltrate the community in that positive way.
Before we get there, and currently while we're sitting in here, I think it would probably be really good, Tiriana, you might be able to do it, is that understanding the actual drivers and reasons as to why we even have equity conversations, so that people can then understand these are the definitions, but these are the reasons why we have these definitions.
Yeah, I think, so one of the things that we really do have to understand is there's an academic who talks about institutional habits. And institutional habits with Sarah Ahmed is about how we exist in these sports clubs that were formed at a certain moment in time. And at that moment in time, they made policies and procedures that matched that moment in time. And that those policies and procedures have become habitual, or have become traditional, or have become the way we've always done things. Unfortunately, at that moment in time, Pacific people might not have been allowed in the club, or might not have joined the club, or might not have lived in that area, which means that that particular rugby club, for instance, has got institutional habit, policies, procedures that were designed at a time with no Pacific voice. So unsurprisingly, we go decades down the line and we don't have Pacific at the governance, because everything about how that club is run was designed when there were no Pacific people allowed. And that means we have to have a conversation about equity, because we need to do the work of unmaking those policies and procedures in that club or in that governing body so that more people can join, so that we can start to have a healthy and thriving club. Because if people feel like they can't belong, they're not going to join your club. And then as the demographic shifts around you, your club is going to die and you're not going to know why, right? You're going to be, why don't people want to come play with us? Well, because you're no fun. Or you call us racist names. Or my auntie's not allowed to sing on the sideline, right? So how do you rejig those roles so that Pacific people want to join? And that's what the equity conversation's about, is how do we unmake things so that more of us can enjoy sports?
Yeah.
That's why building capability is so important. Because I think when you have historically only had a certain amount or no seats at the table in any given situation, the narrative then becomes that there's only that many seats to be sat at. And it becomes a clawing game of who will I stand on to get where I need to be, and you know, and it steps like from a cultural context, that's far away from the values that we culturally experience and have been passed down to us through generations. So I think understanding that historical context also includes, and a big component of that is building capability and opening doors for those behind you, because there aren't a limited amount of seats at the table, regardless of who says that there is.
But I think just to add on to what you've just said, because I think that's so important, I think there's also an element of people who are in positions, and I'll count myself, I'll count these wonderful people at this panel as well. We need to take responsibility that when we get in the door, that we leave it open for people to come in. Because I'll be honest, from my own experience, I see amazing people in amazing positions giving great speeches at amazing events, but I'm trying to understand where is the tangible...
Name them.
where are the tangible steps that you've actually taken to now empower some young girls, some young people who actually want to get there too? Are you actually getting in and opening the door? Or are you slamming it so shut so that you can keep your positions that no one else can filter in?
The meritocracy also rewards us, right? So it rewards us for being the first. It rewards us for being the best. And so because we get rewarded for being the only one, we then start to panic that if we let someone else in, maybe I won't shine as bright, right? And so how do we
work as hard as I did?
Yeah,
because I was the first person, right?
I was the first.
Exactly.
If I did it, they can too. I got through university
I had to
without
do all of these
this.
things first.
Yeah, right? So why shouldn't they? They could be just as good as I am. Yeah. But the reality is that we need to wedge that door open, like you said, stick down that ladder and hold back whoever we need to hold back to stop, to let people come through, right? So we need to push those other people out of the way and say, no, these people are coming through, and provide that capacity and capability training. Make sure that, I'd like to think that I sit on boards where it's not just because I'm Pacific. It's actually because I bring a skill base that's needed. So that way you can bring in more people and go, yeah, this person happens to be Pacific, but also do you know that they really understand how to write a structural plan for change in the next 20 years?
I think that it's an important conversation that needs to be had. I think people shouldn't be scared about challenging the default, which is equality, and actually switching that narrative and applying what we've discussed at this table today, which is about a needs-focused equity approach. I don't think that that's patronizing. I think that that's actually listening to your audience and tailoring solutions that can be sustainable and then leave a legacy.
If you don't have a plan, it's not going to happen. What I want people to understand is that equity and equality are not the same thing, and you need a plan for equity, and it needs to be data informed, or your sports team, your sports club, your sport, whatever it is, will continue to look the same. It doesn't matter how many Pacific people you put on a poster.
I guess the response kind of goes to, it's a two-prong approach. For those who have the privilege of already being able to build towards equity, it is ensuring that solutions are equity centred first, because that's why things always fall over, is because equity is added on top as this nice to have. Equity is no longer a nice to have. It never should have been. It is a must have. So when you build your strategy or your process out of that first, it is a long way to go, and it is the harder conversation, but it is the one that is more long-standing for better outcomes for all on the other side.
I don't have much more to add to that, but I think in leadership roles, I think a really pivotal word for me is service. Know who you're leading and advocate for them. Understand who you're serving and be an advocate for them, because no matter where you are in an organisation, you are there to be an advocate for the people that your organisation serves.
Thank you very much for joining us today to actually be unpacking such a hard topic, but not so hard topic, and making it hopefully really accessible for everyone. Appreciate you guys' time.